Somewhere right now, someone is sitting with an extra $300 at the end of the month. Maybe it's you, and you're staring at a list of options, a retirement account, a savings account, maybe some student loan debt still hanging around. Maybe a friend keeps mentioning a stock. You want to do the responsible thing, so you pick one, almost at random, and you move on with your life. But here's what nobody tells you. The amount that you invest matters far less than most people think. The order you invested in changes everything. This isn't really a story about money, it's a story about sequence. Think about baking bread. The ingredients don't change. Flour, water, yeast, salt. But if you add the salt before the yeast has had time to activate, you kill the yeast entirely. Same ingredients. Wrong order. Completely different outcome. Investing works almost exactly the same way, except almost nobody tells you the recipe. They just hand you a list of ingredients and assume you'll figure out the sequence yourself. Here's where it gets interesting, and where most financial advice quietly fails people. The first step in the sequence has nothing to do with investing at all, at least not in the way most people picture it. If your employer offers any kind of retirement match, that comes first. Before debt, before savings, before anything else. Economist Brigitte Madrian, who has spent her career studying how people actually behave inside retirement plans rather than how they're supposed to behave, found something remarkable. Even when an employer offers free money through a matching contribution, a significant percentage of employees never claim it. Not because they don't want free money, because claiming it requires an active decision. And Madrian's research consistently shows that people are far more likely to follow whatever the default option is than to make an active choice, even when the active choice is clearly better for them. This matters because an employer match is, mathematically, the closest thing to a guaranteed return you will ever encounter in your financial life. If your employer matches 50 cents for every dollar you contribute, that's an instant 50% return before the money has even been invested in anything. No stock market in history has ever reliably produced that. Skipping it to pay down debt or to build savings or to chase a better investment somewhere else means walking past free money to go find money that isn't free. So step one is simple. Contribute enough to get the full match. Not more yet, just enough to capture what's already yours. Step two is where the sequence starts to feel emotionally uncomfortable because it asks you to slow down instead of speed up. High interest debt comes next, before almost anything else. Not because debt is morally wrong, because of the math. If you're carrying a balance on a credit card at 20% interest, paying that down is functionally identical to earning a 20% guaranteed return. Risk-free, tax-free, with zero volatility. There is no investment available to an ordinary saver that reliably beats that. Nobel laureate William Sharpe, whose work laid much of the foundation for how we understand risk and return, has pointed out repeatedly that comparing a guaranteed debt payoff to an uncertain market return isn't really a fair comparison at all. One is a certainty, the other is a bet, and a 20% certainty beats an average 8% bet almost every single time you run the math. This is the part people skip. Not because they don't understand it, because paying off debt feels boring and investing feels exciting, and the sequence that actually builds wealth is rarely the one that feels exciting first. Step 3 is your emergency fund, and by now, you've probably heard why it matters. 3 to 6 months of expenses, sitting somewhere boring and liquid, protecting you from having to reverse the first 2 steps the moment life throws something unexpected at you. This step exists specifically to protect the 2 steps before it. Without it, one car repair or one medical bill can force you to rack the credit card back up, undoing the very progress the sequence was designed to protect. Step 4 is where things get more interesting, because this is where tax treatment starts to matter more than most people realize. If you have access to a health savings account and you're on a high deductible health plan, this is arguably the most powerful account most people have never heard of. It offers something almost no other account offers. Money goes in tax-free, grows tax-free, and comes out tax-free, as long as it's used for medical expenses. Researchers who study tax-advantaged savings vehicles have pointed out that this triple tax advantage makes the HSA mathematically superior to almost every other account available to ordinary investors, and yet most people either don't have one, don't max it out, or spend the money immediately instead of letting it grow. Used correctly, it can function as a second retirement account disguised as a medical fund. After that comes the Roth IRA, if your income allows you to contribute to one. Money goes in after tax, but grows completely tax-free and comes out tax-free in retirement. This is where the order starts to compound in a very literal sense. Every dollar that grows inside a Roth account grows without the IRS ever taking another bite of it again. Step 5 is going back to your workplace retirement account and increasing your contribution beyond just the match, up toward the full allowed limit if your budget supports it. And only after all of that, step 6 is a regular taxable brokerage account, the kind with no special tax treatment at all, useful for goals that don't fit neatly into retirement or medical categories. Here's the twist, and it's the part that explains why so many people get this sequence backwards without realizing it. Economist David Laibson, who has spent decades studying why people consistently undersave for retirement despite knowing better, found that human beings are wired with something researchers call present bias. We consistently overweight immediate rewards and underweight future ones, even when we know, intellectually, that the future reward is larger. This explains almost perfectly why people skip the boring early steps of the sequence and jump straight to the exciting ones. A stock a friend mentioned feels immediate and thrilling. An employer match feels distant and bureaucratic. High interest debt feels like someone else's problem to deal with later. The sequence that actually builds wealth requires resisting exactly the instinct your brain is built to follow. This is why most people don't invest in the wrong things. They invest in the right things, in the wrong order. They open a brokerage account and start buying stocks before capturing their full employer match. They start investing aggressively while carrying a balance on a card, charging more interest than any investment could realistically overcome. Not because they're bad with money, because nobody ever explained that order was the variable that mattered most. Think about what this means for that person sitting with an extra $300. If they don't yet have their full employer match, that $300 belongs there first. Full stop, before anything else on the list. If the match is already maxed and there's high interest debt sitting nearby, it belongs there next, even though throwing money at a credit card statement will never feel as satisfying as watching a stock ticker move. If the debt is handled and the emergency fund isn't full, it belongs there. Only once those boring, unglamorous, structurally essential steps are complete does that $300 get to do something that feels more exciting, sliding into an HSA, a Roth IRA, or eventually a taxable account built for long-term growth. None of this requires being a financial expert. It requires understanding that a recipe followed in the wrong order rarely produces the same result as a recipe followed correctly, even when the ingredients themselves are identical. There's something almost freeing about this once you actually internalize it. You don't need to master every kind of investment that exists. You don't need to predict the market or pick winning stocks or understand every acronym on a financial website. You need to follow 6 steps, roughly in order, and let each one protect and strengthen the ones that come after it. The employer match protects your return. The debt payoff protects your certainty. The emergency fund protects your progress. The tax-advantaged accounts protect your growth from being eroded over decades. The sequence does most of the work. You just have to stop skipping ahead. There's one more layer to this that deserves attention, because it explains why the sequence tends to break down specifically at the transition points, the moments where one step ends and the next one is supposed to begin. Psychologist Catherine Milkman, who studies how people actually follow through on plans rather than how they intend to, found that transitions are where behavior is most fragile. It's not that people abandon a good plan outright. It's that they finish one step, feel a small sense of accomplishment, and then drift, rather than immediately locking in the next one. Someone captures their full employer match, feels good about it, and then simply keeps contributing at that same level for years, never consciously deciding to move on to the debt payoff or the emergency fund. The sequence stalls not from failure, but from momentum quietly running out at exactly the moment it needed to continue. This is why treating the order as a checklist, rather than a single decision made once, matters so much. Each completed step should trigger an immediate, specific question: what's next? Not eventually. Not once things settle down. Immediately, while the momentum from finishing the last step is still there to carry you into the next one. It's also worth addressing the objection that probably crossed your mind, somewhere in the middle of this. What about debt that isn't high interest, a mortgage, for instance, or a low-interest student loan sitting at 3 or 4%? Here the math flips, and the sequence adjusts accordingly. Low-interest debt, the kind sitting well below what a diversified investment portfolio has historically returned over long periods, doesn't need to be paid down aggressively before investing. It can sit alongside the other steps, paid at its normal scheduled pace, while the money that would have gone toward extra payments flows into the accounts further down the list instead. The rule was never debt is bad. The rule was always compare the guaranteed cost of the debt to the guaranteed benefit of paying it off, and let that comparison decide the order, not the emotional discomfort of simply having a balance somewhere. This is also where a second behavioral finding becomes relevant. Researcher Emily Hazley, who has studied how psychological framing affects savings behavior, found that people are significantly more likely to stick with a savings plan when it's framed as protecting something they've already built, rather than as sacrificing something they currently have. This is part of why the sequence works better as a story than as a spreadsheet. The employer match isn't just free money, it's the foundation the rest of the structure sits on. The debt payoff isn't just a boring obligation, it's removing the one guaranteed leak in the system before trying to fill it further upstream. The emergency fund isn't just idle cash, it's the insurance policy that keeps everything above it from collapsing the first time life gets complicated. Framed this way, the order stops feeling like a set of arbitrary rules and starts feeling like a structure worth protecting, one step at a time. None of this changes the 6 steps themselves. It just explains why so many people, even ones who genuinely understand the sequence intellectually, still drift out of order in practice. Knowing the recipe and actually following it in the kitchen, under time pressure, with distractions pulling at your attention, are 2 very different skills. The order gives you the recipe, treating each finished step as a trigger for the next one, and understanding which debts deserve urgency and which don't, gives you the discipline to actually follow it when it counts. Somewhere right now, someone is still sitting with that extra $300, still staring at the same list of options. The amount hasn't changed, but now the order has, and that single shift, done consistently over years instead of once, is often the entire difference between building wealth and simply feeling busy with money.